Good day, everyone. I'd like to welcome you back to Contemplating Catholicism. And I'm happy to have with me today Justin Simonds. And Justin is a lot like me. We are reverts, not to be mixed up with perverts. We are people who had an initial experience in the Catholic Church and then had a stint somewhere else for a long period of time. In that case, for Justin, it was in several different ways. But I'm glad that you're with us today, Justin, and share with us your story a little bit. First of all, in cradle Catholicism, what your experience was early on.
Yeah, happy to do that, Chris, and thanks for having me here. It's always a pleasure, and I enjoy our friendship, so I appreciate you inviting me on here. So as mentioned, cradle Catholic like you, and I grew up in the era where it was pre-Vatican II, so everything was in Latin, and as a young boy, I knew the responses, I just didn't know what anything meant. So
you had the catechism training and the First Communion and those things, but in the Tridentine Mass, the Latin Mass.
Yes,
and that was my experience too early on.
Yeah, and I did not go to Catholic school, but I went to catechism after school. So that's the way that I went through my First Communion and then went through confirmation. I was not an altar boy, didn't do anything necessarily as part of the church. Didn't really know the priests that well. It was just, you sort of showed up on Sunday. And
I think you mentioned that it was your mom that maybe had more of a spiritual impact on your life early on?
Yes, my mother was Southern Baptist. My father had come down from New Jersey and was working in Marietta, just north of Atlanta. Met my mother, and they were married 30 days later. Whirlwind. My dad could make a quick decision, which was great. He did go to the priest. The priest talked to my mother. She agreed to raise any potential children Catholic, agreed to convert. She didn't know that much about Catholicism. She had a belief that there were good people in all religions.
Right.
But she was the one who sort of taught me prayers and talked to me about God all the time. And my dad, I love my father. He was more of an authoritarian, as you would expect of somebody in the 50s. And we didn't really talk about religion that much, but he was regimented about going, every Sunday to Mass. So
for that time, Mass was kind of the central thing that you did together. Catholicism in the home, was it more of a reality?
We didn't do much Catholicism in the home, to tell you the truth. That is interesting looking back on it. I didn't think about that. When I'd go back to Georgia and visit my relatives that were all Southern Baptists, they always said grace before a meal.
Yeah.
We never did.
Right.
But my dad was, I think he knew the religion quite well. He just didn't really talk about it in the home. We didn't do family rosaries or anything like that.
I know for many Catholics, particularly from the father, it's about trying to provide for the family, being a working person, and that was my experience some too. But I know you mentioned too that a little bit later, maybe at the age of 17, you started getting an interest in the Bible, and that for me too, I was never exposed to the Bible. In my Catholicism, I had catechism in a Christian or in Catholic school, but didn't have exposure to the Bible till later. But can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, it was, and I don't know what the catalyst was about this, but when I was 17, for some reason, I thought, I've spent my whole life so far just sort of memorizing the catechism, where's God? God is everywhere. I'd be able to answer the questions. But I thought, I can read. Why shouldn't I read the Bible and, get it right from the source there? At the time, I thought, well, this whole Old Testament stuff, that's ancient history. I don't need to know that. I just, once Jesus got here, that's the big event.
So you started reading in the Gospels.
I just read the Gospels.
Yeah.
I thought that's, and my mother had a little family Bible, an old King James, where, everything that Jesus said was in red.
Right.
And
so that's what you started with.
That's what I started with, yes. And it was sort of the old English, a lot of these and thous. And
then I know you run into things like Jesus had brothers and sisters, or at least it's interpreted that way, that he had literal brothers and sisters, and other things that seem to contradict maybe some people's understanding of Catholicism.
Yeah, once I started reading it, and to be fair to Catholicism, I did not go to a priest. I did not read any books explaining the issues that I ran into. I was 17. I knew everything. So,
boy, I know. I was so knowledgeable at that age too. We were Bible experts after a little bit.
Oh yeah. So I started reading Matthew, and you get by the genealogy, which is always a little hard. You think, oh, I don't care about the begats. I don't care that Jesus is related to David, but you get by it, and then you get into some of the familiar stuff: the wise men, Jesus getting baptized, the temptations. But then I started reading the Sermon on the Mount, and I just fell in love with that. I mean, it would put me in tears. I'd read some stuff, and
And it's something how the Lord certainly uses His Word, and He takes us where we're at the time.
Yeah.
And He leads us. But then your road took kind of a varied background. Your time in religions apart from Catholicism, I believe one of the things you were involved in was Jehovah's Witness.
Yes. So to sort of set the stage, as I was reading through Matthew, I ran into certain things, call no man father. Yeah. I thought, what the heck? And, as you mentioned, the brothers, and the brothers are named. And I thought, well, where is, the ever virgin? Have the Catholics never read the Bible? Because I'm reading it, and here it is, right here.
It was a different understanding.
Yes.
So in Jehovah's Witness, your exposure there as you talk with people, I don't think you had a long period of time there, but you...
I did. The timing for them was perfect, because I had read the Gospels, and I was very confused. I felt like Catholicism had gotten it wrong, and I didn't know what I should do, and suddenly there's a knock at the door, and somebody says, would you like to do a Bible study?
Oh, yeah. Man,
yes.
You're just beginning to understand.
I would love to do a Bible study.
And somebody had some answers.
Yes.
Whether or not they're the right answers, that's another question.
Yes, I was always, as we discussed, I was always impressed by experts.
Yeah.
And this guy seemed like he really, really knew the Bible. So I'd do the Bible study. They had a little blue book that you would go through, and every week you'd come back and complete a little chapter, and there were readings from the Old Testament, New Testament.
So you had considered, at least at that point in your life, boy, this is an expert. This is
yes.
But then I believe you also had a time when you were with the Worldwide Church of God, Armstrongism.
Yes. So I was very influenced by the end of the Gospel of Mark. Mark talks about, you'll know the right church because it's got these signs, right? And not so much that I took the signs, you have to handle snakes or anything like this.
Well, yeah, they have that in Appalachia.
Yes,
snakes.
Yes, we have some holy rollers that do that, I know. But what that cemented in my mind in Mark was that there was a true church out there.
But
And
then
I
you
just had to
have
find it.
another expert, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you have certainly Armstrong
Yeah.
was an expert.
What would happen is I would, study something for a while, like Jehovah's Witness, and something would hit me as, that's wrong, that's wrong. And I would leave it, and I'd find something else.
So there was certain things in Jehovah's Witness and also with the Armstrongism that there was questions
Yes.
about different things.
Yes, and like I said, I was very susceptible to somebody who seemed to be an expert in the Bible, and Armstrong was, as you know, a dyed-in-the-wool fundamentalist, and he would explain stuff in the Bible. He'd have booklets. What impressed me was you could write to them, they'd send you books for free all the time, and I got book and book and book and book. And it would be, well, the Bible says this, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
And that was my experience in fundamentalism, too, as a fundamentalist pastor. I mean, we had all the answers.
Yeah.
And we knew them well.
Yes.
Or so we thought. But then I think you got more involved in some of the, more of the mainstream Protestant arena, listening to different people.
Yes, always liked my family, the Southern Baptists. I would visit them every summer, so I would, loved them. It was very, Southern Baptist was very emotional. Usually the sermons would be, the call, the altar call, right? And you'd feel pulled up there.
And Charles Stanley, I guess.
Charles Stanley.
Being a big Southern Baptist.
Yes.
And I know someone else that I knew, David Jeremiah, back in his young days.
Yeah.
He had a program too. But
I used to get, I would get tapes. I would listen to radio shows, and I'd be influenced, if somebody I felt like, struck me as saying something important, I would get things like David Jeremiah got his study on David, which was a cassette thing of 20, 30 cassettes. So
back in the days of cassettes, for those of you who don't know.
Don't know what that was. Yeah.
And then I know Dennis, is that Prager?
Yes.
Who was Jewish.
Yes.
So you go from Jehovah's Witness to
fundamentalist
Baptist to Jewish.
Yes. I started listening to, so I was in Los Angeles at this time, and he was on the radio at that point. He's a big conservative guy now, but he was also a rabbi. And he had this show every Sunday night called Religion on the Line, where he had a Catholic priest, a Jewish rabbi, and somebody from another religion. Usually,
so there was a way to kind of compare them because of how he presented.
There'd be like a current event, like there was the woman who was raped in Central Park, and I think the bishop there went in and forgave the men who did this, and the rabbi was just incensed, that these boys needed to be punished, and
so you had different.
So you had different perspectives from a religion standpoint. But I was so impressed by Dennis Prager. He was so smart. He had written a lot of books. I got tapes from Dennis Prager,
and he had a statement I know that you mentioned before to me that stuck with you. If I wasn't Jewish, I would probably be Catholic.
Yes.
Why do you suppose you said that?
This was, I think, the more you study Catholicism, I think the more you see the Jewish roots of it.
Yeah. Definitely.
And
with the same branch.
Yes.
And we honor the Old Testament as well as the New Testament.
Yes.
And we believe too, we're part of that same branch.
Yes, so this sort of gets into my conversion back, and as you and I discussed, I was getting married in the early '90s. My fiance was Catholic, but like most Catholics I met, knew nothing about the religion. They were just cradle Catholics.
So more of a nominal Catholic.
Nominal Catholic, and just really couldn't answer some of the, theological questions. I said, why do you say Father when Jesus said not to say Father? Nobody, did Jesus say that?
And I imagine you had to have a lot of theological questions going on in your mind.
Yes.
Because you had a lot of input from different directions. So, and I know that led up to eventually talking to a Monsignor.
Yeah. If I could get the story in, what happened was that we were going to get married in this Protestant church.
And a crystal cathedral, but not the crystal
Not
cathedral.
the Crystal Cathedral, yes. The glass chapel on Palos Verdes, if you're familiar with Los Angeles.
And unfortunately, a place that has been on fire lately.
Yes, yeah. It had some issues with some earthquakes and everything else. So it's it may be closed now, but we'll have to see. But anyway, the guy, as we were explaining, my fiance said, she was Catholic, and he incorrectly said, well, this would be a valid Catholic marriage here. It wouldn't have been, but when I was telling him my background, which we've been chatting about, I said, well, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. He said, well, if we look at spirituality as a mountain, he said, it sounds like you're going around and around looking for the perfect path up, and there's no perfect path.
So we all, no matter what path you take, we're all headed up the same mountain.
That was sort of the point, but pick one and just stick with it.
I was thinking of that in the terms of, when you start out in a certain direction and you're off just a little bit, you can be way off by the time you get to a destination.
Yes, absolutely. But the metaphor sort of stuck with me that, I have been jumping around for 25 years now. And that week was when I had the tape from Dennis Prager where he made that statement. If I wasn't Jewish, I'd be Catholic. And
so
I thought,
there was
that's weird.
The Catholic came back into your mind, or Catholicism, I guess.
And then as you and I were speaking, I was getting a magazine subscription from William F. Buckley. Was the editor. My friend had given me this subscription, and I always read his editorials because they were just so logical, so moral, so beautiful. I thought, what a brilliant person. And then I found out he's Catholic, and I thought, well, he's a genius. How could he be Catholic, knowing what I know, right? So I thought, is it possible that I at 17 missed something?
Yeah.
So that's when
at this point, you were how many years in that?
About 25 years
25 years?
Yeah.
And I know you've been a Catholic for quite a few years too, so it was full circle, brought you back to Catholicism, and I know you mentioned a Monsignor that you were able to talk to.
Yes, I had a little condo in Playa del Rey, and the nearest parish was a parish called St. Anastasia, and I just called up and made an appointment, and there was a Monsignor there that was the pastor.
Yeah.
He met me in the rectory. There was a little fireplace there, and we chatted for about 2 hours.
Really? And it's good that, and I imagine you had lots of questions at that point.
Yeah. I was sort of going through my background and how, I sort of had these 3 knocks on the head, about Catholic, and I was just, felt like I was being called back to Catholicism. And, his interesting point was, well, you went through all the sacraments. He said, all you have to do is start coming back to church. And I said, I've been away for so long. I said, I could not tell you what the difference was between Catholic and Protestant and, anything else.
So then you got plugged into something that we're involved in now, which is called the OCIA, but at that point it was RCIA. Which is similar in many ways, but
and he said, well, why don't you audit this RCIA class? He said this pretty much goes over Catholicism, and there was a sister that was teaching it, just wonderful, and by then, I started reading Karl Keating and some of the other stuff, Catholicism versus fundamentalism, and I thought, oh my God, I missed everything.
So Christian Answers, is that what was
yeah,
part
Catholic
of that?
Answers. I was listening to Catholic Answers.
Catholic
I sort of came back with a vengeance, that
Karl Keating, I know he has Catholicism and Fundamentalism was one of his big works, and you certainly knew something about fundamentalism in different realms.
Yeah, I didn't know there was a Catholic response to it.
Yeah.
And reading Karl Keating stuff, I thought, oh my God, this is incredible.
What were maybe a couple of the big issues or the big hurdles you had to get over to say, well, I'm Catholic again, in your mind? What kind of hurdles?
Yeah, I was okay with calling the priest father. I understood that because Jesus had actually called out a number of things. I focused on father, but he said, call no one master, call no one rabbi, call no man father. So Jesus is making, an emphatic point, not don't ever say the word father. I mean, you invalidate the commandment, right?
And the Apostle Paul said, I was a father to one of the churches he was addressing.
So none of the apostles seemed to take him seriously in terms of not saying father.
Yeah.
So you realize he was making an emphatic point. And
I know last night we... in our OCIA time together, we went through the Eucharist, and to me, that's one of the big dividing points between Catholicism and many other religions, or in the Protestant arena. Did you come to a different understanding as far as the Eucharist goes?
I did, because when I left the church, I really did not have, I think, of course, I was a boy, but I didn't have a full appreciation of that. And this was when the priest was facing away from the congregation, when he did the consecration, and when you went up and you kneeled, and they would put the host in your mouth. You just there were kneelers at the altar.
People would come up and you would stick out your tongue, and
it was very regimented. You got nowhere near the blood. That was reserved for the priest, and it was just very formal, very formal, very formal. And I would say I never really fully appreciated it. Going through the RCIA program, I got a much greater understanding of that, and of course, reading some of the Catholic authors and listening to Catholic Answers.
And I know for me, I was amazed when I went back and looked at John chapter 6 or the Last Supper narratives, what the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 11, and it was something that I said, wow, it drew me back.
Yes. As you do the Bible reading, it's very interesting how some people gloss over some things too. I mean, even though they're in quote Bible Christians,
it's there.
The 6th chapter of John is usually glossed over a bit.
And so you've been back in Catholicism for how many years now?
Well, let me count it up here. 25, 35. You're probably coming close to 40, I guess.
Yeah, so it's been some period of time.
Some period of time I've been back, yes.
That's pretty good for a 50-year-old.
Yeah.
To kind of wrap it up here, I know that many of the people that watch Contemplating Catholicism come from different backgrounds, and some are contemplating, I know, coming to the Catholic faith. What kind of advice would you give to someone if they're thinking of that?
Boy, I just have to say that Catholics have an answer for any question. That was the thing that I sort of came to after the fact. I mean, you hear a lot of things about Catholics, and Catholics have this wrong, and Catholics have that wrong.
And most of the time,
else.
it's either one, a lie, or a misconception, one or the other, and I'm not sure.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. I think of something that Archbishop Sheen said. He said there's probably 100 people in the U.S. that, hate Catholicism. He says, but there's thousands and thousands that don't understand Catholicism.
It's what they think
Catholicism is, but it's just, anything that you come up with that you think is a barrier, Mary's always a barrier. Read the Catholic literature on that and see why they think that.
And I think what you find when you do that, there's a scriptural basis. You also find that there's a consensus of the church fathers. And then, of course, we in Catholicism believe that there's a magisterium that also enlightens us sometimes with doctrinal questions we may have. But I appreciate your being with us today. And,
Chris, it was a great pleasure.
I'd love to hear more of your story. I know we heard it before we had coffee together. We went out before to hear each other's stories some. But thank you for sharing it here today. And I know that God will use your testimony in many people's lives.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it, and thank you very much.